A result at last. Africa's oldest leader wins another term. But was Cameroon's election free and fair? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Paul Biya. He's Africa's second longest reigning leader. And after winning a 7th term in Cameroon, Paul Biya could soon take the top spot. His landslide election victory was expected, but not without controversy. Separatists in the English-speaking regions vowed to disrupt the poll. And it worked, as voters in those areas largely stayed indoors. But it wasn't the only problem that plagued this election. Even before the result was announced, there were multiple calls for a rerun. Maurice Kamto, once a minister in Biya's government and now his biggest opponent, said he was the real winner and accused the ruling party of voter intimidation and fraud. But the courts rejected those claims. So, is Paul Biya really as popular as the polls suggested? That debate in a moment. But first, Haider Abbasi has this report.
Paul Biya's not ready to say goodbye. The 85-year-old politician's been re-elected as Cameroon's president, a position he's held since 1982. Biya seems as popular as ever, winning 71% of the vote. His nearest rival received only 14%. But his opponents say the election on October 7th was flawed. A day after the poll, one opposition leader went so far as to declare himself the winner.
I received from the people of Cameroon a clear mandate that I intend to firmly defend until the end.
But none of the results had been revealed when Kamto made his claim. And the government says he broke the law by announcing his victory. Cameroon's election body says the poll was free and fair. It dismissed petitions from the opposition that say there was voter fraud. But it's taken more than 2 weeks for the results to be released. Some have claimed ballot tampering.
When they say it takes 15 days to come up with the results of an election, then it's obvious there's fraud. 15 days to come up with results means fraud is inevitable.
Tens of thousands of people were unable to vote. Turnout in the English-speaking regions was as low as 5%. Anyone trying to vote here was reportedly threatened by armed separatists. For years, people in these areas have complained they've been discriminated against by the majority of French speakers. This reached a climax in 2016 when the Anglophones complained that the French language was being forced on them. Teachers and lawyers went on strike. But the protests were crushed by the military. After this, an armed group that says it represents English speakers has demanded a separate state for Anglophones. Hundreds have been killed since the conflict began 2 years ago. And thousands more have fled Cameroon to escape the violence. But overall, the election went ahead without any major disruptions. 2 rebels and a police officer were killed just before the vote on October 7th. So what's the next move for Cameroon's opposition? And can Paul Biya bring peace and security to the country? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now is Elvis Mbwage. He's the president of the ruling Cameroon People's Democratic Movement in London. And also with us is Alain Mbe. He's the European campaign coordinator for the opposition Cameroon Renaissance Movement. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. I think it's quite clear where you both stand on this election, but let's just be absolutely certain. Alain, how do you feel about Paul Biya getting another term?
I feel like the vast majority of Cameroonians who went to the poll on the 7th of October, they voted for President Maurice Kamto as their new president. However, Paul Biya and his Constitutional Council have decided otherwise. Very disappointed. However, we stand by Cameroonian, and as suggested by Professor Maurice Kamto, the president of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement, we will resist, and things will not be as before.
Alain, Maurice Kamto got 14% of the vote. So unless you're telling me that the vote was rigged, how can he possibly be the man that the vast majority of Cameroonians chose?
The vote was indeed rigged, and that is a soft word, by the way. Cameroon is one of those few countries where you would think there is democracy, but it is actually a disguised dictatorship. This is a country where you have 25,000 polling stations, and representatives of candidates at the polling station are literally arrested, molested, and sent away. Where the coalition of the party in power, together with the Interior Ministry and the LACAM, the body who organized election, they basically make things up. Let me give you just one simple example. At the end of the polling day, every result in every polling station is made public. Everyone can collect those results, count them, and you will know what the result is. Set aside all those stations or regions where there was no election. I hope we'll come back on the situation in the southeast and northwest, southwest and northwest of the country.
Elvis Mbogwa, Paul Biya is still your
Yes.
president, and he will be your president for another term. Alain says that the vote was rigged, there was intimidation, low turnout. It doesn't count. Tell me why you disagree with him.
As a matter of fact, I must first thank you for giving me the opportunity and to express our joy and to thank God that our national chairman, His Excellency Paul Biya, has been re-elected once again. And we Cameroonians, the vast majority of Cameroonians have spoken, have chosen whom they want to lead, whom they really want to lead them. And as a matter of fact, my party, the CPDM, is very proud, and we know that our vast majority is not just by the word itself, it's by the practical participation in the electoral process. People like Alain just say these things because they are not political participants, but they are easy. They come across as people who participate in the political process in Cameroon. What people don't understand, and I want the world to understand this, is that the CPDM party, led by President Paul Biya, is the majority, and it is covered it is covered all over Cameroon, and our militants are passionate, enthusiastic. If I should tell you, we have 25 million Cameroonians,
right,
and just less than 6 million have registered to vote, and just 3 million turned up to vote. What do you think for yourself?
Let me ask
As a matter of fact, the Cameroonians have spoken.
Okay, Elvis, let me ask you. The state says 10% of voter turnout in the 2 Anglophone regions. There's been trouble in the Anglophone regions. There's been a lot of violence recently. The International Crisis Group actually halves that. They say there's only 5% voter turnout in the 2 Anglophone regions where there's been big problems. So tell me honestly, Elvis, you can say that a lot of people voted for Paul Biya, but if only 5 to 10% of people are even showing up in the areas where there are the major problems in the country right now, can you really tell me Paul Biya is the president for all Cameroonians?
When you talk of the 10% turning up, what of the 80% turning up? And I want to tell you this, the Southwest and Northwest no doubt has some instability, but the government ensured that security and a proper coordination of election should take place, and this happened. And we can see that there are places where elections took place without any problems. As it's just it's a propaganda that the opposition wants to use to sabotage the image of our democracy. However, we understand that there is instability in the Northwest and Southwest, and the number that was supposed to vote was a little bit lessened because of the crisis.
Okay, Alain, come in here. Alain, the blame is directed at the opposition, saying you want to delegitimize a democratic process. That's why you're telling people not to vote. Is that fair?
Which democratic process? You tell me. This is a country where even the prime minister could not even go and vote in the region he belongs to. He applied to be given the opportunity to go and vote, and they told him, no, you can't. It isn't. And the very reason why he wanted to go and vote in the northeast where he belongs to was indeed because it is unsecure. That is his own statement. And he was told, no, you cannot come and vote. He was not even able to vote. This is the prime minister of the country. This is a country where the second in charge, the president of the Senate, was able to vote in Paris, where there's no provision in the constitution or the electoral code to allow him to vote in Paris. This is a country where we are talking about an election where the president was president while a candidate. He came out once. He made a speech for 7 minutes to Cameroonians. 7 minutes. This is a country where he was scheduled for a visit in the southwest of the country, where you have all kinds of trouble going on, where there's literally a war going on. He was not even able to set foot there. A few other trips that were planned were literally cancelled just because that part of the country is at war, literally. Now, they could not have an election in those two regions, and clearly, even
Elvis?
5% is far too generous.
Okay, Elvis?
What Alan is saying is just what I would still call political sabotage. I will tell you that I will take this opportunity to tell the international community, Cameroonians are really proud that His Excellency Paul Biya has been re-elected. And I will let you this. One of the southwest region today in Boya, the mayor, Mayor Ekema, has turned out with a massive crowd celebrating the re-election of His Excellency Paul Biya. Tell me, are these people from the eastern part of the country or the southern part of the country? These are the Anglophones who are happy to show the world that they are happy that President His Excellency Paul Biya has been re-elected. And this is just to show the world that we are blessed. And I will tell you this, we know one thing. Now that His Excellency Paul Biya has been re-elected, he's a guarantor of peace in Cameroon, a guarantor of security and progress.
You said this, right? So let me take you up on that. This is not a new, fresh face. You're saying a guarantor of peace and security and stability. There hasn't been peace and security and stability, especially in those Anglophone regions of the country. So let me ask you the question from a different angle. Here's a man who's 85 years old and he's been in charge for 36 years. Why do you want to give him another 7 years? The man has had 36 years to bring peace and prosperity to Cameroon. Why do you want to give him another 7 to finally make it right this time around?
Since when has democracy started excluding people? That is the benefits and the advantages of democracy, where the people choose who they want to be their leader, where the people believe in a leader who gives the vision to his people, a leader who his people have faith in. And that is why democracy comes in, and that is the advantage. Nobody should be excluded. If President Paul Biya has been elected, at his age, it means that his people believe in him. His people believe that he will give them the peace that he has given them before. He will give them the progress and the opportunities that he has given them before. He is the person who brought the multi-party politics in Cameroon. He is the person who is giving us the democratization experience we are experiencing today. Even people from afar who do not even understand the political implications and the dynamics in Cameroon can criticize us without even knowing what is going on. And that is all grace to His Excellency Paul Biya. And I'll tell you this, we that support him know that we are fine and Cameroon is in progress. And his vision 2035 will not fail us, because Cameroon is getting into emergence by 2035. And this is the vision that His Excellency Paul Biya has put forward for Cameroon, and we're all behind him. And we believe that this time around, no matter the distraction we are getting, the minority and loud distraction we are getting, the majority of and the silent of silent majority of Cameroonians will push forward to live in a prosperous Cameroon.
Okay, by the end of this 7-year term, he will be 92 years old and still a way off the 2035 vision. Alain, let me ask you about what your plans are. So I know that you believe that Maurice Kamto should be the true president and that he won. He and Joshua Osei want a recount. If there's no recount, what do you do? What's your next step?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that I address a key issue here. Cameroon is one of the 200 countries in the Concert of Nations. And looking at where we are in the world on a number of indicators, we are lagging behind. Just to give you one number, on the Doing Business ranking, we rank 162. My brother Elvis should be ashamed of saying that a man who took over a prosperous and peaceful country is a man who rules the country out of Switzerland, where he spent most of his time. A man who went out campaigning for just a single day can stand there and say that he's a guarantor, he can give any more than what we have seen. I'm out of my mind on trying to understand what he's talking about. Now, back to your question. Professor Maurice Kamto, who came out on the scene in a system where we had over 300 political parties. That was in 2012 when the Cameroon Renaissance Movement was born. We went to the election in 2013 and came out fourth when you look at the number of the count of voters. We have been campaigning relentlessly for the electoral code to change, to be improved. It hasn't, unfortunately. It is structured in such a way that it favors the system. We have been campaigning for the system to split the power so that the Constitutional Council, for instance, isn't one where Paul Biya can name his friends and acquaintances to make decisions for him. So we will use, and this is repeating Professor Maurice Kamto's word, the president-elect for Cameroon, we'll explore every legal means necessary in order to secure this victory. We campaigned on the theme of a football where we scored the penalty. The penalty was scored, and Cameroonians have been asked to remain mobilized in order to secure this victory. This is the occasion as we have not had before. The last time someone came on the scene to give this hope to Cameroonians was back in 1992. Since then, there's been a long void that the Cameroon Renaissance Movement have come in and failed. And we will be at it, exploring every means around the world, obviously, to make sure that justice is restored for Cameroonians.
Okay, I have to wrap, but I think it's fair if I give Elvis Mbogwa a final response in 20 seconds or less, please, Elvis.
I just want to say that the world should understand that Cameroon is back on track. With the election of His Excellency Paul Biya, this is hope. This is a hope for the region that has been very unstable in the past decade. And we could see what the present government and His Excellency Paul Biya did, especially with the issue of Boko Haram. And the world could see the difference, what makes a man thick and what makes a man beloved. This is a leader who's given his life for his country. We can count a few of them in the world today. And we are proud to have President Paul Biya as our leader, and we only hope for the best for 2035 emergence of his vision for our country. And I take this opportunity to congratulate Cameroonians who have spoken and shown the world that we love our leader, we love our nation, and we are back on track.
Okay, gentlemen, I've got to move on. Hope to have you both on the Newsmakers again in the future. Alain Mbe and Elvis Mbogwa, thanks again. Still to come on the program, escaping a mental health crisis. 11 children are evacuated from Australia's controversial detention centre in Nauru. But will others follow anytime soon? And Malaysia moves to abolish the death penalty. Is this a breakthrough for the region? It's been described as an open-air prison, but it's Australia's answer to those fleeing war and persecution. On the tiny island nation of Nauru sits a detention centre where horrific abuses are alleged to take place, and some of the worst affected are children. There are growing calls for all asylum seekers under the age of 18 to be immediately evacuated, and for the first time, that pressure appears to be working. This week, a small group of children were transferred off the island, but will the rest of them be following anytime soon? Shoaib Hassan takes a look.
It's the latest effort to end Australia's detention of asylum seekers, particularly children on the island nation of Nauru. And this time the calls for moving them are coming from within the leadership in Canberra. MPs belonging to the Liberal Party, which leads Australia's Conservative coalition government, have demanded that underage asylum seekers be immediately transferred. The demands were made after the UN weighed in on the matter.
In the context of deteriorating health and reduced medical care, Australia must act now to prevent further tragedy and loss of life. UNHCR renews its call for refugees and asylum seekers to be moved immediately to Australia, where they can receive adequate support and care.
Nauru is located almost 3,000 kilometres northeast of Australia. It houses one of several offshore detention centres operated by Canberra on Pacific islands like Nauru and Papua New Guinea's Manus Island under a controversial policy known as the Pacific Solution. The policy was introduced by the government of former Prime Minister John Howard in 2001 to prevent asylum seekers from reaching Australia's shores. The policy was stopped after criticism in 2007, but then was reintroduced in 2012 by the Labour government. Currently, 1,534 people are held at all such centres. Nauru holds 218 detainees. That's a big drop from its peak in 2014, when more than 14,000 asylum seekers were held in all such facilities. The centres have been under criticism after human rights groups and activists documented widespread abuses by guards and the administration. The groups described the conditions as being like concentration camps and children being most at risk of harm. That doesn't seem to have changed.
When I went to visit these children at home, they had taken to their bed. They were no longer eating or drinking sufficient amounts to keep themselves alive. Many were not able to toilet themselves. They were incontinent of urine and feces. And when I tried to talk to them, to these children that previously would talk back to me, they would not respond. They would just stare through me. And seeing that level of deterioration in the children was really quite horrific.
But a campaign led by the Australian Medical Association seems to be working. Sustained pressure on the authorities in Canberra to evacuate the children has started to help. 11 children have been taken off the island in recent days. Will that continue despite reluctance from Australian leaders? And will rising public pressure finally see these detention facilities shut down? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined now by Christine Roofner in Brussels. She was the psychologist for Doctors Without Borders on Nauru until the organization was forced to leave the island 2 weeks ago. In the town of Hamilton in Victoria, we have Kevin Bailey. He's the state director of the Australian Conservatives, a breakaway from the ruling Liberal Party. And completing our panel from Melbourne is immigration lawyer Farhan Rahman. Farhan, let me begin with you. There are 52 kids left on Nauru. What should be done with them and about them?
Absolutely, they should be brought to Australia immediately. There is no doubt, well, there's been allegations, we should call them, of sexual abuse, rape, exchange for sexual favors for contraband, and the list goes on. In such circumstances, I don't believe there is any other further discussions of, we can talk about whether or not Australia is bound by international law and all the other discussions, but I believe clearly when there is such circumstances, these children should be brought to Australia immediately.
Kevin Bailey, the circumstances demand that these children should be taken to Australia, and if they need help, to help them. What do you think?
Australia is an extraordinarily compassionate country, and one of the things that Australians are very, very concerned about is making sure that people do get this sort of attention and support that they require. Unfortunately, we've got activists and people who've got an agenda that are prepared to lie and distort and confuse people. And I think it's quite disgusting that they use these children and they use refugees and asylum seekers as part of their pawns for their game of achieving their objective that they're looking to achieve.
Kevin, who's lying?
Who's lying? Well, the people who've got the agenda you know, fundamentally, these people are on Nauru because they have wanted to come to Australia, and there is no way for them to come to Australia. If we let the people that are on the offshore detention centres come to Australia, then it's going to open the floodgates and allow many, many thousands more to come in. And of course, the people that are advising them, the lawyers and the activists that are involved in this, that's exactly what they want to see happen. They want to destroy the
certainly. I'm just trying to understand something,
Kevin. That we have.
Certainly, I'm trying to understand something. What are they lying about? Are they lying about the fact that these children need help and care?
Well, I don't know personally what they're lying about, but what has happened in the past, you know, several months and over the last several years, is again and again we found these accusations, and we found these claims that people have supposedly being raped and or every criteria that you could actually use. It's like the boy who cried wolf. Every time we get concerned and we look at what's going on, Australians are just fed up to the back teeth of hearing these claims, and so often they just are proven to be unfounded and untrue.
Okay, so Kevin, when the Australian Medical Association says unequivocally that what's happening there is a humanitarian emergency requiring urgent intervention, are they making it up?
We don't know. We don't. You know, one of the things that you've got is people that are involved there, and you know what's going on with the families, and you know these children have free to. They're not in prison or they're not locked up anywhere. They're free to go to school. They've got medical attention there, and they've got the ability to travel around the community. What they're saying is that the Nauru, the people of Nauru, are you know sort of so horrific that these people can't even be near the people that live there. The population of Nauru, and so one has to question why they're casting such aspersions on the local population.
Christine Roof, now other guest Kevin Bailey says that there are people with an agenda who need to paint the picture as really bad for the people in Nauru, especially the children, those migrants and refugees. Is that what you saw? Is it not as bad as it seems?
I can confirm as a doctor, as a clinical psychologist who's worked in refugee contexts in different parts of the world, that what's happening in Nauru is horrific. There is an absolutely devastating mental health conditions happening, a complete, utter lack of hope for the future, and it's very serious indeed.
So Kevin Bailey, here we have Christine Roofner from MSF who was on the ground saying it's horrific. Would you accept that? She doesn't have an agenda. She doesn't want to flood Australia with refugees. She's just doing her job.
Sure. So what happens is there's no way for those children or for any refugees that have been processed not to be refugees. I don't know whether they've been confirmed as refugees. I think they come from countries like Bangladesh and Iran and a number of different countries, Pakistan. They're not fleeing violence. And so what has been known, and they knew before they came to Australia, was before they tried to come to Australia, was that there is no way known that they can enter Australia.
Hold on, Kevin.
There's 190
hold on for a
countries
second.
around the world.
There's a couple of different arguments here, right? A couple of semantic issues here. Are you telling me that you can make the argument to a Bangladeshi kid that, listen, your country is not at war, so you don't qualify for being a refugee, so even though you might meet a standard for being really unwell, I'm sorry, it doesn't apply to you?
What we've got is in Nauru, it's a sovereign nation. Nauru, if there's no facilities there in Nauru and they need to go somewhere else, the problem is that this mental health issue that is affecting these people for being hopeless and having no hope is that they're being told by activists that if they just keep on going to the federal court and appealing every decision and stretching it out, that they'll eventually get to Australia. The fact is that the government of Australia has said that they will not come to Australia. At the moment, the Australian government is particularly vulnerable because they're now in a minority government situation. And so these people now suddenly, coincidentally, it's come up at this time. And so, you know, the fact that if we want to find a solution for these people, they must find another country to go to because the Australian government is not going to allow them to come into Australia. They literally have to go to some other country.
Farhan Rahman, are these people being given false hope by activists who might seem to mean well, but in the long run mean them harm?
Look, I absolutely disagree with Kevin. It seems like Kevin is the lawyer here, making some, remarks and assumptions about whether or not these particular refugees, which I believe have been certified as refugees, should be given protection in Australia. I think it's pretty clear to me that these people need to be brought to Australia. And you can see, as a member of as a government member, no matter what you say to the government, no matter which doctor says what, no matter what lawyer says what, it seems to me that they have one view, and that view is that these people are not coming to Australia, whether or not there are allegations of child abuse or allegations of sexual assault or rape. Nothing seems to matter. And Kevin does not seem to be talking facts. He does seem to be talking semantics. Everything that he should say should be backed up by fact. And this is the biggest problem. I believe that the Australian public have been lied to about refugees, immigration for a long time. It's been used as a means to win votes. Politics of fear. It's been going on for a fair bit of time in Australia.
Kevin, here's your chance to respond.
Sure.
Are you using politics of fear as a weapon?
Not at all. What we're saying is that Australia brings in more refugees than just about any other country of the world. We continue to bring in literally thousands and thousands of refugees every year under our refugee, the UNHCR. We're we're the second largest intake of refugees anywhere in the world. We're a small country with about 25 million population. By the way, I'm not a member of the government. I'm not in the government. I'm actually just a citizen. And so our policy that we're looking at as a party is saying that the government's made this policy. These people were aware of that when they attempted to come to Australia. They've been told by activists that they can keep coming to Australia, and they have to find another place. They can go back to their country of origin, or they can actually go to some other country. The Australian government at the moment is not bringing them here, and yet that's the problem, is that we are bringing refugees. We're bringing more refugees than most other countries in the world, nearly every other country other than the United States. So, it's not a case of Australia not accepting refugees. We're very generous in that regard. We always have been and will continue to be. But the fact is that these particular people cannot be settled in Australia. They could be settled in America or in New Zealand or anywhere else, but they have to recognise the fact that the solution is not to bring these people to Australia.
Yeah, there's talk about
find another solution.
There's talk about New Zealand. New Zealand might want to take them, but the Australians might not let that happen unless New Zealand agrees that they can't come to Australia after New Zealand. That's going to be an interesting thing to look at down the line. Christine Rufner, I want to draw your attention to something that came from the Republic of Nauru's Twitter account. They tweeted, "Do you think the ABC, Guardian, Fairfax or other activist Australian media will ever publish these photos of the modern Nauru hospital staffed by excellent international doctors? Don't count on it because it will expose their lies and political agenda." And they use the hashtag #StopFakeNews. So, Christine, according to at least the Twitter handle, or whoever's running the Twitter handle of the Republic of Nauru, their hospital and their doctors are good enough. Is that true?
I can confirm that I spent many days going to the hospital for meetings, various activities. We actually worked out of one of the hospital containers, helping the local population. When we left the island, the hospital, as I mentioned in the press conference, has no English-speaking psychiatrists. There is one psychiatrist for the island, and that person doesn't speak English. A lot of what they see in the emergency room, from what our patients have told us, are psychiatric emergencies, people who need to receive inpatient care, intensive outpatient care, and they absolutely don't have the resources, both in terms of personnel and physical resources, to manage this. There are very nice parts of the hospital that have been cleaned and are brand new. That's absolutely true. But in terms of what we saw the needs are, those cannot be met by the facilities they have.
Okay, and what's interesting, we're going to clip this up, and I guess from our Newsmakers account, we'll reply with your clip to their tweet. What is quite clear is that they have an English speaker running the Twitter account, so they would understand this. Christine, let me ask you, very frankly, Christine, I know you don't want to wade into politics, but there's a problem, and there's a big political debate regarding this. What is the humane thing to do? You've worked at close quarters with these children and with the others. What is the humane thing to do politically here?
The humane thing to do is to evacuate all asylum seekers and refugees from this island to a safe place where they have safety, security, and access to comprehensive mental health treatment.
Farhan, is that what you support?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree.
Now, tell me, Farhan, what does this say about, I mean, we've heard you and Kevin go back and forth. Kevin saying, you know, he's a member of the Conservative Party, but he's not in the government right now, even though he might be in agreement with a lot of what the Liberal Party is saying with regards to this particular issue. What does this say right now about the culture wars, if you like, within Australia right now, with regards people who want to come into Australia? Is Australia no longer a welcoming place to outsiders, in your opinion, Farhan?
No, I guess, look, Australia is a welcoming country. I don't think that we can simply negate the fact that Australia has allowed and continues to allow people to seek onshore protection. However, when it comes to this particular Nauru debate, which has been going on for years and years, and when there is clear evidence to show that there are children suffering, then I honestly believe that it's a no-brainer. I mean, I haven't even discussed the international legal obligations that the Australian government has under the Refugee Convention, or perhaps some of the duty of care that Australia may have under domestic law. I quite agree with the doctor's comments on this, that there is a moral duty as a human being to bring these children to Australia because they are not safe. It's simple as that. You know, I had a call earlier today from a cousin of mine, and his daughter, she had a seizure just a little while ago. An ambulance luckily could come to her house, pick her up and take her to the hospital. Now, if they didn't reach the hospital at a certain time, it would have been a different conversation. Maybe, you know, the child would have suffered much more, and, you know, there could have been some other issues that would have come out of it. But these people in Nauru don't have those sort of medical services. They don't have those sort of support services. They have serious mental issues, and they do need to be taken care of. And for that, I believe that we have to look into the human side of ourselves and say, well, these people need to be brought to Australia.
Okay. Farhan, Kevin, and Christine, I'd love to have you all back on the program again, but for the moment I have to move on. I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
The Secretary-General commends this decision as a major step forward in a global movement towards the universal abolition of the death penalty. The Secretary-General seizes this opportunity to call on all countries which still retain it to follow the encouraging example of Malaysia.
Murder, drug trafficking and treason, all punishable by death in Malaysia, but maybe not for much longer. After Muhammad Luqman Muhammad received the death sentence for selling medicinal marijuana oil to cancer patients, there was public outrage. Up stepped Malaysia's Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, who not only called for a review of the case, but now wants to eliminate the death penalty altogether. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Kuala Lumpur by O.I. Sun. He was the political secretary for former Prime Minister Najib Razak. Also in the Malaysian capital, we have Kasturi Pato. She's a member of parliament with the Democratic Action Party. And completing our panel from Philadelphia is John Lott. He's the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. I thank you all for joining us. Kasturi Pato, let me start with you. Are you happy? Is this the right decision from Mahathir's government to abolish the death penalty?
Absolutely. I think we are all aware that on the 9th of May, the Malaysian people came forward to vote for a change. And one of the promises in the Pakatan Harapan manifesto is that we abolish the death penalty. And this matter is something close to my heart and close to the hearts of my colleagues as well. For the past 5 years, as far as I'm concerned, I've been lobbying within the Malaysian Parliament, with the ministers in the then government, with their cabinet, with civil society to push for the abolition of the death penalty in Malaysia. So this is indeed good news to me and many of my colleagues in the coalition.
Okay, Sun, this is not going to a referendum. Is it what the people want? Are the politicians making the right decision on behalf of the people?
Well, personally, of course, I think it's very much overdue because the death penalty for the longest period of time was like a sort of Damocles hanging over a lot of people in Malaysia. The people who, well, for whatever reason, have to traffic in drugs, and sometimes they are only in possession of weapons, and they are sentenced to death. Well, on the other hand, of course, there is still a sizable Malaysian public who are yet to embrace the abolishment of the death penalty. I think you will need some more persuading to go on before they could come around.
Yeah, so John Lott, a lot of Malaysians were outraged. As I mentioned earlier, there was a guy who was selling medicinal cannabis to cancer patients, and he was put on death row. And I think, you know, sometimes it just takes a little microcosm, one single case to get people talking about it. This new government says we want to go with the tide of history where other countries are abolishing the death penalty. This is a remnant. It's a relic of a bygone era. We want to move forward. Are they right, John Lott?
Well, I mean, that one case you mentioned seems like a pretty ridiculous case. I don't have any problem with not using the death penalty for something like that. But on the other hand, the issue to me is one of public safety. And the question is, how many murders can you deter by using something like the death penalty? We know the death penalty is much more of a deterrence. There's a large amount of empirical work that's been done in the United States on the death penalty, and each execution that we have results in about 8 fewer murders than you would have had otherwise. So the issue is saving life, you know. So that doesn't mean you want to go and use the death penalty for everything. I think that'd be a mistake, for example, to go and use the death penalty for robbery, because in a crime like that, if the criminal knows that he's going to be executed, he may go and kill witnesses in order to try to go and lower the probability that he's going to face the death penalty. So just because it doesn't make sense in some areas doesn't mean it doesn't make sense in it doesn't make sense in some other areas.
So let me then ask you, Kasturi, because this is something that was mentioned with Sun as well. We don't actually know exactly what the Malaysian people want. And there might be a lot of Malaysian people who agree with John Lott that, sure, the guy who's selling weed to cancer patients shouldn't go to the gallows, but maybe somebody who's a murderer, maybe somebody who's committed an egregious act, we believe that person needs to be killed by the state. So isn't it then wise for the government to maybe put it to the people?
I think I've mentioned this before many times on different platforms, that sometimes when a government seeks public opinion, the questions have to be framed properly. And as far as the death penalty is concerned, it cannot simply be a do you support the death penalty or not, or a yes and no sort of an answer. Questions regarding the death penalty have to be properly framed for a society, for a culture, just to make people understand along the way the implications of their answer. And let's face it, for many times we've noticed governments questioning the public, and then especially when it comes to the death penalty. I very rarely or almost have never heard of the government asking the public, do you agree with taxes to be increased, or do you agree with not paying traffic summonses? But when it comes to the death penalty, many governments, including the government before Pakatan Harapan, tended to rely heavily on public opinion by not furnishing public with enough information. So you get a skewed public opinion poll, which definitely would call for the death penalty to be retained.
But why not give them all the information? Certainly. Why not give them all the information and then hold that poll? Give them all the information properly. No fake news. Give them the information and say, you guys decide.
I agree. So far, after the announcement by the Minister and the Prime Minister's Department on the 10th of October, which happened to be the World Day for the Abolition of the Death Penalty, 2 local dailies in Malaysia conducted a poll, of course, with a clear-cut question of, do you support the death penalty or not? And of course, the public outpouring of it was negative against the abolition of the death penalty. But at the end of the day, it is a government's duty to fight crime. And murder has been around from the beginning of time. I believe in Switzerland, when the death penalty was abolished, 40% of hard crimes dropped. I would like to see something like this happen in Malaysia. I believe that perhaps the Malaysian public is not ready for murder criminals to be let off the hook. But if you look at the statistics...
Okay, so you say Switzerland's a shining example. Okay, John Lott, when Kasturi mentioned Switzerland as a good example of abolishing the death penalty and crime goes down, you rolled your eyes. Tell me why.
Right. Well, you just can't look at one place by itself. There are lots of other things that can change at the same time. One nice thing about data in the United States is that different states make decisions about whether to have the death penalty or not at different times. And so, you know, maybe they institute the death penalty at the same time they increase penalties for other crimes or give the police more money or increase resources for prosecutors. Well, you got to try to account for those different factors. And when you do, you find that when states in the United States have instituted the death penalty, even after accounting for all those other factors, you can find a very significant deterrent effect. But looking at one country by itself, you can't account for other things that are changing at the same time. Whereas if you have 51 different laboratories like we have here in the United States, maybe one state will pass the death penalty at the same time they change resources for prosecution. Another one may just do it by itself.
Although John, you say it's a it's a laboratory of 51 examples. When we look at the general trend, states are moving towards abolition, right? Rather than the other way around.
Right. There have been a few states. Again, it's not been through votes. It's usually been through either court decisions or, in a couple cases, legislative decisions. But, you know, you still have most of the states in the United States have the death penalty. And, you know, the question is, what can we do to save lives? That seems to me the ultimate question.
Kasturi?
Yeah, my esteemed colleague is entitled to his opinion, but then in Malaysia, the death penalty has not proven to be a deterrent. As we know, there are more than 1,200 inmates on death row in Malaysia. 900 over of them are on drug-related offences. And then you have discharge of firearm, murder, etc. Over the years, there's been an increase in number of people on death row. And we must understand, and this is the differences that we have in the United States. You have every state has a different legislative procedure, and in Malaysia, it's not. We have the federal government, and then we have state government. So the system is different. And when we announce that Malaysia is going to abolish the death penalty, it applies to all states in the country.
Understood.
And it's not just because the European Union as a bloc has abolished the death penalty, or over 142 countries have abolished the death penalty. It's just doing what is right. And at the end of the day, you know, if there is, no one can guarantee there won't be a miscarriage of justice at the end of the day.
Oh, got it. And I'm glad that we're having this kind of, you know, cross-pollination here. John, we usually have you in US-specific discussions, so this is fascinating to see the two perspectives against each other here. I want to do some housekeeping here, Owaisun. There's something that creeps up every time I read about the abolition of the death penalty or the potential abolition of the death penalty in Malaysia, is a case that could implicate the former Prime Minister Najib Razak and your former boss. This is always mentioned, and something that bothers me every time I read about this. It talks about ending the death penalty that could aid in an investigation of the former Prime Minister. So some of his bodyguards went to jail for the killing of a Mongolian woman. As far as I understand, one of them fled to Australia. He might have some new information that could potentially implicate the former Prime Minister Najib Razak. The Aussies don't want to send this guy back to Malaysia because there's the death penalty in Malaysia, but now they might because the death penalty will be abolished. Is that a conspiracy theory, or might that be part of the thinking that you can abolish the death penalty and you could also put the former prime minister behind bars? Owaisun.
Well, I think the former prime minister has been charged with at least by now 2 series and by very soon at least 3 series of charges. I think there will be no shortage of reasons if there was an attempt to put him behind bars, for example. But I think for me more troublesome is the fact that very often in developing countries, Kasturi mentioned just a miscarriage of justice, and Professor Law talked about various factors and so on. Well, the simple fact is in many developing countries, sometimes the procedural aspects of a trial, and especially a death penalty trial, is not perfect. Sometimes you have people being coerced into certain confession. Sometimes you have evidence being planted and so on. And people could be sentenced to death for these offenses. And, like sometimes, I just came back from a long trip abroad. When I pass through customs, it's always with a very heavy heart, because I don't know who is going to slip some illicit substances into my luggage. And if I am somehow, quote unquote, caught because of that, I might be sentenced to death, very innocently. So the abolishment of the death penalty for me is a huge sigh of relief.
Okay, this is interesting. And it's been an interesting discussion with all of you. I've got to move on, but I hope we have this discussion again. Kasturi, Owaisun, and John Lott, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, how will the US respond to thousands of Central American migrants moving towards the border? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.